When I walked back to my daughter Marian's house to grab the purse I had forgotten on her couch, I never expected to hear her husband's voice drifting through the slightly open kitchen window, saying, "She signed it without even reading. The house will be ours in a few months." Those words punched the breath out of me so fast I had to steady myself on the porch railing. For a moment, I wondered if my 75-year-old ears had betrayed me, if the hum of the evening cicadas had blended with his voice in some cruel trick of sound. But then he kept talking, calm, confident, certain, and his certainty froze something deep in my bones. "You did good, Marin," Roger said, his tone dripping with approval. "She trusts you completely. That is what makes this work." My own daughter's voice trembled when she answered, "Roger, I just hope we are doing the right thing." "That is the beauty of it," he replied smoothly. "It is not wrong. It is business. She will not understand, but she does not need to. This is how we secure our future." I had heard enough. I stumbled back from the window like I had been hit. My purse, the reason I had returned in the first place, was suddenly iron heavy in my hand, its leather strap digging into my wrist as if trying to anchor me to the earth. But the earth itself felt unsteady. My breath fluttered. My chest tightened. I could not tell if I was cold or burning. If this story means something to you, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. I did not knock on the door. I did not walk in and confront them. I left in silence, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel as if trying not to alert the world to the truth I had just discovered. The sky looked bruised, the deep purple of a storm that had already passed but left its threat behind. Maybe that was what betrayal looked like, an after-storm sky. I unlocked my car with hands that shook harder than I liked to admit. As I sank into the driver's seat, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked older than they ever had, not because of age, but because of recognition. Because the moment you realize your own child has been pulled into a stranger's scheme to take everything from you, something inside you ages all at once. I sat there for several minutes. The engine hummed. My heart thudded. My ears kept replaying their voices. "The house will be ours. She trusts you completely. She does not need to understand." Words that felt like fingers wrapping around my throat. I drove home through the slow, rolling streets of Raleigh, watching the familiar neighborhoods blur into long streaks of memory. My street with the big oak tree that had shaded my children since they were toddlers. My porch where I had once sat with Marin during summer thunderstorms. My windows, which I now feared might one day be locked against me by a court order or a bank letter. When I stepped into my house, it greeted me with the gentle smell of old wood and lavender cleaner, but the comfort was different now. Thin, fragile, like a quilt threadbare from too many seasons. Betrayal has a way of soaking into the walls, into the floorboards, into every space where trust used to live. I placed my purse on the kitchen table, the same table where I had signed the papers Roger had brought over a month earlier. He had said they were for a refinancing plan that would help with long-term maintenance, something Marin had supposedly suggested to make sure I could stay in my home for years to come. He had smiled that bright, polished smile he always wore in front of me, the smile I had never trusted, though I had never been able to prove why. I had signed only because Marin had insisted. She had touched my hand gently and said, "Mother, trust us. We just want to help." And I, the fool, had believed her. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the soft yellow light above the sink, remembering her face, remembering how proud she had looked when she had brought Roger home 3 years earlier, remembering how he had shaken my hand with that firm, confident grip that men use when they are selling something. Maybe he had been selling something all along. I took a deep breath and sat down, folding my hands together. My pulse beat against my palms in little bursts of electricity. I needed to be calm. I needed to think. Panic is a thief. It steals clarity, and I could not afford to lose any more than I already had. Yet it kept creeping in. What if they had already taken something from me? What if the house was not even legally mine anymore? What if the loan had gone through without my knowledge? The thoughts swarmed like angry insects. I reached for the folder where I kept copies of all my important documents. My fingers shook as I leafed through insurance papers, property tax receipts, and the printed email confirming the last appraisal. But then, near the bottom, I found the photocopies Roger had left with me after that day in the kitchen. The mortgage documents. I stared at them for a long time. The pages blurred and refocused, as if my eyes were unsure whether they wanted to see the truth or hide from it. My signature was there, my initials, my date, everything except my understanding. He had tricked me, and Marin had helped. I pressed the papers flat against the table, feeling their edges dig into my skin like tiny blades. I felt myself trembling, not from age, not from weakness, but from a fury so deep it felt ancient, like something that had lived inside me all my life, sleeping quietly until the right moment woke it. Betrayal does that to a person. It wakes the parts of you that you thought had grown dull. As the night stretched on, I kept replaying their conversation in my head. Marin's hesitation, Roger's confidence, his tone, steady, practiced, like someone who had done this before. And that was when the second realization hit me. This was not spontaneous. This was not new. This was a pattern. I had seen the signs long before this. The rushed engagement, the charming, too perfect veneer, the big financial ideas. The way Marin had slowly begun distancing herself from me after the wedding, as though her thoughts no longer belonged to her but to him. I had chalked it up to newlywed excitement. I had tried to remind myself that children grow up and drift. But now I saw it for what it was: manipulation. Systematic, intentional manipulation. I walked into my bedroom, opened my dresser drawer, and took out a small digital recorder I had bought years earlier to record lecture notes when my hearing started giving me trouble. I held it in my hand, weighing it, feeling its promise. If Roger was planning to take my house, he would not stop there. Men like him never stop at the first victory. They take and take until there is nothing left to take, and I refused to become his third victim. I sat on the edge of my bed, recorder in hand, and whispered to myself, "You are not helpless, Rose. Not now. Not anymore." But even as I said the words, my voice wavered. The fear was still there, cold, dense, heavy, a fear that settled deep into my stomach. The fear of losing my home, losing my independence, losing the life I had spent decades building. I closed my eyes and thought back to the kitchen window. That moment, that freezing, shattering moment when I heard my own daughter participate in a plan to strip me of the one thing I had left that was fully mine. The window had been cracked only an inch, a single inch. And that single inch had opened a new chapter of my life, one that I had never imagined I would have to face at 75. I thought of Marin as a girl, her first scraped knee, her first heartbreak, her first day at college. I had been there for all of it. Held her hand through storms she thought she would never survive, comforted her when she doubted herself, lifted her when she was weak, and now she was helping a man tear me down. Love makes people blind. I had seen it happen. I had warned her, and I had been ignored. Still, a part of me refused to hate her. The anger was there, sharp, bitter, impossible to ignore, but beneath it was something more complicated. Something sadder. A kind of mourning, as if the daughter I raised had slipped away from me long before this night, and I was only now discovering the loss. I put the recorder on the bedside table and looked around my room. The photographs, the quilts, the soft lamplight, the little wooden jewelry box my sister Livia had given me 20 years ago. I traced my fingers across its lid, feeling the warmth of its familiar surface. This was my life, my history, my home, and I would not allow anyone, not Roger, not even Marin, to steal it from me. The night stretched on, carrying me toward a future I had not prepared for, but could no longer avoid. If I wanted to protect myself, I needed more than anger. I needed proof, strategy, allies, and the strength to face truths that hurt deeper than any financial loss. But at that moment, all I had was the echo of their voices and the chilling realization that my world had shifted under my feet. And even though I was terrified, even though betrayal wrapped itself around my heart like a fist, I knew one thing clearly. This was only the beginning. I woke the next morning with the strange, disorienting sense that something inside me had shifted while I slept. It was as though my mind had worked through the night, stitching together fragments of truth I had ignored for too long. The sun poured softly through the curtains, but the light felt colder than usual, like it was illuminating a world I no longer recognized. I sat up slowly, my joints creaking their usual symphony of complaints, yet the ache in my chest drowned out every physical discomfort. The recorder sat on my nightstand, a silent witness to my growing resolve. I stared at it for several seconds before picking it up and holding it in my hand. It felt small, almost too small to be capable of protecting me, but that was the thing about survival. Sometimes the smallest tools became shields when wielded with the right intention. I turned it over in my palm, feeling its cool surface warm beneath my touch. I needed evidence. Evidence of what I had heard, evidence of what Roger was planning, evidence to prove I was not losing my mind. Betrayal has a way of making you doubt your own memories, your own instincts. I refused to let that doubt consume me again. I had spent too many years second-guessing myself, too many years allowing others, family, friends, strangers, to lean on my kindness until it became a crutch they thought they controlled. Not anymore. I carried the recorder into the kitchen and set it on the table while I made coffee. The smell of fresh grounds normally soothed me, but that morning it carried a sharper edge. I thought about Marin, and the familiar scent twisted my stomach. I had shared countless cups of coffee with her at this very table. We had talked about her childhood, her dreams, her heartbreaks. Now I wondered whether she would ever sit here with me again without the shadow of guilt hanging between us. As I poured the coffee, my mind wandered back to the conversation I had overheard. The words repeated in my head like a broken record. She signed it without even reading. The house will be ours. The ease with which he said it terrified me. Men like Roger did not fear consequences. They counted on their victims being too ashamed, too confused, or too overwhelmed to fight back. They preyed on silence. They thrived on secrecy. Well, I intended to break both. After finishing half a cup, I pulled my laptop from the drawer and turned it on. The screen glowed brightly, reflecting my uneasy expression. I had never been particularly tech-savvy, but I knew how to search. I typed Roger's full name into the search bar and pressed enter. Nothing suspicious at first. A few social media profiles, some glowing comments from acquaintances, a photo of him from high school, a family reunion picture. And then, buried several pages deep, something caught my eye. A short news snippet from another state describing a divorce case involving a man with Roger's exact name, and suspiciously similar details. A rushed marriage, a contested property settlement, a woman claiming financial manipulation. My heart pounded. The article did not include a photograph, but the pattern was unsettling. Could it have been him, or someone with the same name? I clicked the related articles and found more hints scattered across different years. Nothing conclusive, but enough to make my skin crawl. The pieces were there, I just needed to arrange them. I printed the articles and placed them in a manila folder. Then I added the mortgage documents and a sheet of paper where I had scribbled my recollection of the conversation I overheard. I titled the page, Window Night Incident. Seeing it written down made it feel simultaneously more real and more surreal, as if I were documenting a crime scene that had taken place inside my own life. Around noon, I reached for the phone. I dialed Marin's number, but hung up before it rang. What would I say? What could I say? The sound of her voice alone might break me. Or worse, it might soften me. I knew my weaknesses. I had spent my entire life trying to be gentle, to be forgiving, to be understanding. But forgiveness without accountability was how women like me ended up trapped, manipulated, used. Instead, I dialed a different number, a clinic that a neighbor had once recommended for emotional support when I was grieving my sister Livia's husband years ago. The receptionist spoke kindly, and after a few questions, she scheduled an appointment with a psychologist named Dr. Helen Rowe. Come tomorrow at noon, she said. She is very experienced with family trauma and elder exploitation. Those words, elder exploitation, made my throat tighten. I had never thought of myself as old enough to fall into such a category, but I suppose no one ever did. Vulnerability crept in quietly, not with age, but with trust. When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at my hands. They looked the same as always, veins like small rivers, knuckles lightly swollen, skin mapped with delicate lines, but they felt different now. Stronger somehow, as if something inside them had awakened. Later that afternoon, I decided to test the recorder. I pressed the button and practiced speaking calmly, clearly. My name is Rose King, I said. Today is Thursday. This recording is for my own protection. The sound of my voice surprised me. It did not quiver like I feared it would. It sounded steady, determined. That alone made my eyes sting. I set the recorder on the table and went about my day, trying to distract myself with small tasks. Watering the plants, folding laundry, tidying the living room, but everything felt off. Even my own home felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. By early evening, I could not sit still any longer. I grabbed my keys and drove to the grocery store, partly because I needed a few things, and partly because I needed to be surrounded by people, even strangers. Loneliness can sharpen fear, and I needed the dulling comfort of normal life around me. As I browsed the aisles, I ran into my neighbor, Edna, a woman in her late 70s with bright silver hair and a laugh that rattled the shelves. She took one look at me and frowned. "You look pale, Rose. You all right?" I opened my mouth to lie, to offer some dismissive explanation, but the truth clawed its way up almost against my will. "I found out something last night," I said quietly. "Something about Marin's husband." Edna set her basket down. "Do you want to talk about it?" Not here, I thought. Not where I might break down between the canned vegetables and the boxed pasta. "Maybe another time," I said. But the softness in her eyes lingered on me like a warm hand on a cold shoulder. It helped. Just a little, but enough to remind me that the world was not entirely dangerous. When I got home, I found that my mailbox was unusually full. Inside was a letter from the bank addressing recent mortgage activity. My blood stopped. I fumbled to open it and read the first few lines. It confirmed my worst fear. The application had moved to a new stage in the approval process. Roger was not waiting. He was moving forward quickly. I read the letter again, blinking back tears, then folded it carefully and added it to my growing evidence folder. The weight of it made the folder feel like a brick. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying different scenarios. Roger manipulating the loan officers, Marin convincing herself she was doing the right thing, my home slipping through my fingers like water. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Roger's grin, the one he used whenever he thought he had charmed another person into submission. I felt my jaw clench just thinking about it. The next morning, I drove to the clinic for my appointment with Dr. Helen Rowe. The building was small, with soft blue walls and a welcoming front entrance lined with potted ferns. Inside, the waiting room was quiet, with a gentle scent of chamomile drifting through the air. A young receptionist smiled at me warmly. "Mrs. King," she said, "Dr. Rowe will be with you shortly." When Dr. Rowe called my name, I expected someone older, perhaps with gray hair and heavy glasses. Instead, she was in her mid-50s, with warm brown eyes and a calm, grounded presence that immediately eased the tension in my shoulders. She invited me to sit in a comfortable chair across from hers. "What brings you here today?" she asked gently. The question broke something inside me. I had prepared myself to tell the story, to be factual and steady, but as soon as I opened my mouth, the dam cracked. The words tumbled out, overhearing the conversation, realizing the betrayal, discovering signs of a pattern, fearing for my home. Dr. Rowe listened without interrupting, her face open and compassionate. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly. "Rose," she said, "what happened to you is deeply painful, but I want to be very clear. What they are doing is wrong. You are not imagining this. You are not overreacting. You are in a real and dangerous situation." I swallowed hard. Hearing it framed so plainly made my stomach twist, but it also brought a sense of validation I had not realized how desperately I needed. She continued, "You are showing remarkable clarity and courage. Many people freeze or hide when something like this happens. You chose to seek help. That is the first step toward regaining control." We talked for nearly an hour. She helped me understand the psychological patterns that made people vulnerable to manipulation, the way trust and love can be used as weapons by those who lack empathy. She explained how con artists identified their targets, how they isolated them, how they created illusions of security that concealed financial traps. But most importantly, she told me I was not alone. Before I left, she wrote down the number of a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse. "His name is Dennis Caldwell," she said. "He is direct, thorough, and very good at what he does. You should call him as soon as you feel ready." The name felt solid in my mind, like a stone dropped into a pond. Ripples of hope spread outward from it. On my way home, I passed a small park where an elderly couple sat feeding birds. Something about their quiet togetherness tugged at my heart. I used to imagine growing old surrounded by my children, grandchildren, family laughter filling the air. But life rarely unfolds the way we picture it. Sometimes it fractures, sometimes it tests us, and sometimes it forces us to rebuild ourselves entirely. That afternoon, I called the lawyer, Dennis Caldwell. His assistant scheduled a consultation for the following week. The waiting felt agonizing, but I knew rushing things could unravel everything I was trying to build. The days that followed were a blur of documenting, organizing, and preparing. I recorded every conversation I had with Marin and Roger, even the innocent ones, because innocence had become an illusion. I wrote notes about every suspicious thing I remembered from the past few years. Each memory felt like uncovering a hidden layer of betrayal stitched beneath the fabric of my life. And then something unexpected happened. 2 men from the bank came to my door, informing me that routine verification questions needed answering related to the pending mortgage. Their presence rattled me deeply. Panic surged in my chest as they spoke, their polite tones barely masking the machinery of a system that could unknowingly swallow me whole. I answered their questions carefully, making sure not to reveal anything that could be twisted against me. Once they left, I sat on the couch, trembling. That night, the stress became too much. My blood pressure spiked, and I felt lightheaded. I called my sister Livia, who insisted I stay with her for a while. That same evening, on the advice of a doctor at the urgent care clinic, I temporarily moved into a nursing facility for observation. The thought of it humiliated me at first. I felt like I was surrendering. But once I settled in, I discovered unexpected warmth among the residents and staff. There was humor, companionship, and a sense of shared human experience that softened the sharpest edges of my fear. A woman named Ruth, who had once been a schoolteacher, became my closest companion there. She had eyes full of wit and stories that stretched across decades. She listened as I shared fragments of my situation, and she placed her hand gently over mine. "Do not let shame silence you," she said softly. "People like him count on silence. Break that, and you break him." Her words kindled a fire in me I did not know I still possessed. During those days in the nursing facility, my resolve hardened. What I had mistaken for weakness became fuel. What I feared would crush me instead clarified my purpose. I realized that the home I fought for was more than a building. It was a symbol of every sacrifice I had made as a mother, a wife, a sister, a woman. And I would not let a con artist rewrite the ending of my story. The night before I left the facility, I lay in bed, listening to the soft hum of the hallway lights. My mind drifted back to Marin, to the daughter I still loved, and a question kept echoing through my heart. How deeply had she been manipulated? How much of her betrayal was truly hers? The answer, I suspected, would hurt me. But I also knew I had to face it. I returned to my sister Livia's home with more strength than I had left with. The evidence folder had grown thicker, my mind sharper, my heart steadier. Each step I took now carried a certainty I had been missing for years. The battle ahead would be long, complex, and painful. But for the first time since that night at the window, I believed I could win. When I sat across from attorney Dennis Caldwell for the first time, I felt like a schoolgirl being evaluated by a stern principal. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s, with a calm, steady gaze that gave nothing away. His office walls were lined with framed cases, awards, and newspaper clippings, each one a quiet declaration that he understood battles like mine. He skimmed through my folder slowly, page by page, lingering on the bank letters, the printed articles about the other women, and my handwritten account of what I heard through Marin's window. When he finally looked up, he folded his hands and spoke with deliberate clarity. "Mrs. King, what you have here is serious evidence of financial exploitation and long-term predatory behavior." He tapped one of the articles with a firm finger. "This man is dangerous, and you are not his first victim." Hearing those words out loud, a confirmation of everything I had tried to convince myself was paranoia, sent a cold tremor through my spine. But beneath that tremor was a pulse of strength. "What do we do?" I asked quietly. He leaned back. "We take control of the narrative. We stop the mortgage from being approved. We file formal reports, and we gather every shred of evidence necessary to expose him completely." I thought of Roger's confidence, his arrogance, the way he had spoken through the open window as though the world belonged to him. And I felt something sharp and focused inside me sharpen further. Dennis continued, "But there is something else. To strengthen your case, it would help if you underwent a psychological evaluation, not to question your competence. Quite the opposite, to establish your credibility and expose the coercion used against you." I nodded. I was no stranger to evaluations. Age came with many assumptions, but this time it would be a weapon, not a burden. A week later, I returned to Dr. Helen Rowe for a full assessment. She greeted me warmly, and her calm presence steadied my nerves. The evaluation took nearly 3 hours. Memory tests, reasoning tasks, emotional assessments, questions about my relationship with Marin and Roger, and the timeline of events. When she finished, she placed a hand gently on mine. "Rose, there is no cognitive impairment here," she said. "What happened to you was not confusion. It was manipulation. You are remarkably sharp for your age, and your responses show strong awareness and judgment." The relief that washed through me was almost overwhelming. Not because I doubted my mind, but because I needed documented proof that I had not walked blindly into my own destruction. The weeks that followed were a blur of movement. Legal forms, affidavits, consultations, recorded conversations, and careful planning. I remained at Livia's house, my sister hovering over me with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had loved me since birth. Sometimes she squeezed my hand when I grew quiet, and sometimes she simply sat beside me, her presence saying everything words could not. Then, on a bright morning in early spring, Dennis called me with news that made my heart stop. "Mrs. King," he said, "the mortgage application has been frozen. The bank flagged irregularities." I closed my eyes and let the breath I had been holding for weeks escape my lungs. "So he cannot take my home?" "Not anymore," he said, "but we are not done yet. There is still the matter of exposing him." A plan was formed, tight, meticulous, impossible for Roger to escape. And at its center was a meeting that Dennis arranged with Marin and Roger under the pretense of clarifying the loan issue. They agreed without hesitation. Men like Roger never feared being exposed until the moment was too late. The meeting was set at Dennis's office. I arrived early, my hands cold, my pulse fluttering. When Marin and Roger entered, I felt a jolt in my chest. Marin looked pale, guilt etched into the shadows beneath her eyes. Roger, however, looked as polished and confident as ever, his smile stretching across his face like a mask made of plastic. "Mrs. King," he said with forced warmth, "we have all had a misunderstanding. Let us clear it up." He almost sounded convincing. Almost. We sat around a large wooden table. Dennis placed a thick folder in front of him but did not open it. Instead, he looked directly at Roger. "Before we begin," Dennis said, "I would like you to listen to something." He pressed a button on a small speaker, and then my voice filled the room, my recording from the night I spoke into the recorder for practice. "My name is Rose King. Today is Thursday. This recording is for my own protection." Roger's eyes narrowed. "What is this supposed to prove?" "Oh, that is the introduction," Dennis said calmly. "Here is the important part." He played the recording I had captured with the device hidden in my purse the day Roger came to discuss the loan again with Marin. His voice was unmistakable, slick, calculated, and damning. "It will not take long," the recording played. "Her signature is already on the documents. Once the funds go through, the house is ours. She will not fight. She is too old to understand what is happening." Roger's face drained of color. He stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is illegal," he snapped. "You cannot record me without my consent." Dennis stayed perfectly calm. Actually, in this state, it is legal for one party to record a conversation as long as they are present, and Mrs. King was present. Roger looked at me, fury twisting his features. "You tricked me." "No," I said quietly, "you tricked yourself." Then Dennis opened the folder, newspaper articles, financial records, testimonies from the 2 previous women Roger had drained before abandoning them. Evidence gathered across states, evidence that proved a pattern, evidence that closed every escape route he might have tried to take. Marin covered her mouth with her trembling hands as she read. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Roger, is this true?" she whispered. He did not answer. He could not. The silence was enough. Marin's cry filled the room, a raw, broken sound that made my heart shatter and mend in the same breath. Roger lunged for the door, but Dennis stood before him calmly, blocking his path. "You are not being arrested today," Dennis said, "but the bank, the authorities, and the previous victims have been notified, and you will face consequences." Roger glared at me with a hatred I had never seen directed at me in my life. Then he shoved past Dennis and stormed out, slamming the door. The moment he left, Marin collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mother, I am so sorry," she cried. "I was blind. I did not see who he really was. I thought he loved me." I walked to her slowly and placed my hand on her shoulder. She was my daughter, my child, my heart. Even in betrayal, she was still the girl who once held my hand on the first day of school. "I know," I said softly, "and that is why I forgive you." Her sobs grew harder, and I held her until the storm inside her finally eased. Over the next several weeks, everything unfolded the way truth often does. Slowly at first, then all at once. Roger was confronted by authorities from multiple states. The mortgage attempt was completely nullified. His pattern was proven. And when it was over, I returned to my home, restored legally and emotionally to its rightful place. Walking through the front door felt like reclaiming my soul. The air inside was warmer, the light brighter, the walls safer. I ran my fingers across the banister, across the framed photos, across the life I had almost lost. And instead of fear, I felt pride. I was 75 years old, and I had fought back. In the months that followed, I began giving talks at community centers and senior groups about recognizing manipulation, guarding finances, and trusting instincts that whisper when something is wrong. Women approached me, holding my hands tightly, telling me their stories. Their gratitude was overwhelming, their courage even more so. I returned often to the nursing facility where I had stayed temporarily, this time to volunteer, to sit with residents, to listen to them, to reassure them that they were seen. They teased me for being the firecracker lady who took down a con man, and I accepted the title with a smile. As for Marin, our road was long and painful, but forgiveness grew slowly between us, like wildflowers after a storm. She visited me often, helping mend the fractures Roger had carved into her heart. And one evening, as we sat together on my porch, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I squeezed her hand. "A mother's heart bends," I said, "but it does not break." Now I sit here in the quiet of my living room, the scent of jasmine drifting through the open window, my home peaceful again. And I share my story not out of bitterness, but out of purpose, because the truth is, betrayal can strike even the strongest among us. But so can resilience, so can clarity, so can justice. If you have stayed with me until now, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. What would you have done in my place? Tell me where you're listening from. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you wish to support more stories like this, you can always use the Super Thanks feature. With heartfelt greetings, until next time.